good can sometimes be just as okay as great. And that allows me to open up more space.
I think most people's thinking around work-life balance is based on an old model. It's outdated, no longer relevant.
And it was amazing to me just hearing myself talk it out to somebody who I am vulnerable with was all I needed. I felt the release go. And I'm like, oh, I got this.
Yeah.
Do I need to be this amped? Can I bring that amp down?
Yeah.
And the beauty of that is like I get to decide how I react to that stress.
Hi, and welcome back to the Living Richly podcast. We're so glad you tuned back in for part two of what was an amazing conversation that we started last week on rejecting the whole work-life balance bullshit and finding sanity beyond the scale. And we got way into this conversation and realized we have so much more that we want to discuss that we decided to do a part two. But I'm curious, before we pick up where we left off, what were some of the concepts we discussed or the things that we talked about that really resonated for you guys last week?
I know for me, everything I said
really resonated with you?
Yeah, it resonated.
The best part of the show.
It was ultimately everything I said.
I've actually asked Steve to just edit out everything else, and it's just basically a running. Yeah,
it'll go viral. Not so bad.
Oh, we're off to a good start. Okay.
The notion of one of the things you brought up about, and it wasn't even original to you, it was Harvard Business Review.
It's feisty.
The notion of the river and the banks being chaos and rigidity and how you kind of flow in there. It just was a great illustration. It's one I've been thinking about for a while since you've shared. I was kind of contemplating
a whole week.
A whole week I've been thinking about this. Is this idea of being okay with chaos and rigidity having influence into how we stay the course.
Yeah, of course, that coming from Dan Siegel's book, Mindsight. What a great, and I love how he uses the word flow, even when we talk about finding a flow to our lives, that the word flow standing for flexibility, love, openness, and wholeheartedness. And I thought, what a great way to check in with yourself. Right?
Yeah, I love that. I think for me, what stood out was just when we talked about the evolution of it all, right? If you think about where it started to where we are today, and then like just exploring how, what does work-life blend harmony look like today? We talked about 4-day work weeks. We talked about flexible schedules, being able to, go off and do your dentist appointment and don't tell me, I don't want to know. So just exploring that whole evolution for me and knowing that it's going to continue to evolve. That for me, big takeaway.
And I think
good.
I think the continued elevation, evolution,
elevation, something else.
The evolution of how people still have it in their heads that balance means 50-50.
Yeah.
Right.
And it's not. It's really about embracing how, whether that's personal, your personal life, your work life, that it doesn't always have to be 50-50, and to be able to design and allow yourself to balance out that scale when it makes sense.
Yeah. I think for me, just in the conversation and even the prep for these conversations, there's so many things that we take for granted until you have to speak to them and you go, I might want to look into this a little bit more, and to find out that our current work arrangement, like that 5-day, 40-hour work week, that's a concept that's over a century old.
It's wild.
And COVID came along, said, hold my beer. I'm gonna throw a big monkey's wrench into this. I mean, the workforce had been evolving already before then, but now there's this fight to try to bring it back to the way things were. And I think a lot of folks, to your point, Wendy, when we talk about like this balance, I think most people's thinking around work-life balance is based on an old model. It's outdated, no longer relevant, no longer makes any sense. And that's why on the show and these conversations, we're not saying don't strive for harmony, don't strive for better integration. But the whole notion of balance, I think, is one that's outdated, right? So we started getting into some questions, a series of questions that we had created to kind of, for people to evaluate kind of how harmonized is my life? Like, how integrated is my life? And the first question we covered, of course, was what does success mean to you? And that's on episode 1. If you're tuning in to this one, so not episode 1, but part 1 of this 2-part series. If you're tuning in, this is part 2. So hit pause, go back, watch part 1, then come back, and this will make sense.
They can do that?
They can do that. A technology called the interweb.
Oh,
yes,
nice.
Yes, they have pause buttons and everything. It's amazing. It's amazing. It's so good that when I'm listening to shows, there's also a fast forward button.
Yes.
So whenever you come on, I just
Wow.
Can you
can we
Speaking of fast forwarding,
Can we do it in real time? Does it work in real time, or can I always wanted a mute button. That would be great too. Anyway, I digress.
It really would be.
It really would.
Won't work for those who are listening.
Eric, we love you.
We love you. I'm feeling it. No, I'm not feeling it. But let's move on. All right, let's fast forward before I get muted. The second in our list of questions, I think that's worth considering when someone is saying like how much harmony is there in my life currently is one, understanding what are the current priorities in your life, because again those change over time depending on the season that we're in, and how well do you feel you're allocating time and energy to those priorities. So I'm going to put that question to all 4 of us. What are your priorities now, and how well do you feel you're in harmony in terms of the allocation of time and energy?
Yeah. So what was so interesting for me is when I answered this question, I went to people because all I heard was priority. So I'm like, my priority in my life are the people in my life, the relationships, my kids, Eric, my family. That's where I went to. And that you're on the list.
I made the list. I was nervous there.
But that's where I went to. And I was like, oh, like how do I find it hard sometimes just to prioritize within that priority, right?
Yeah.
And then as I started to think about it, I was like, okay, but hold up. Work is a priority, right? Like work takes up the bulk of my week. And it was really interesting for me when I was answering it because I'm like, oh, in my mind, I'm trying to prioritize how I spend time with the people I love and want to, and that's where I want to focus. And that's my priority is figuring out the time. Work, I seem to figure out, but it was just an interesting dynamic for me to be like, work, what didn't even enter my mind when I first answered.
And I like that how you answered that, what you said there, because I don't like the question.
Yeah.
I don't like the question only from the standpoint of talking about our priority and then equating it to time, like
time and energy.
Time and energy.
Yeah,
interesting. Yeah,
because in the same way, the things that are a priority may not be the things that I'm spending the most amount of time on.
Yeah,
It's how I'm showing up. And so when I answered the question, I answered the question with, I've got one priority, whether it's work, play, personal life, whatever it is. And that is to show up authentically, to show up genuinely as myself in every environment. So whether that's in my relationship with Wendy, whether it's the relationship with our kids, with the girls, or with the all of family kind of thing, and with friends, and at work with clients, in all of those contexts, am I showing up authentically? Then that to me is now I'm good. I've got the work-life balance when I'm doing that.
Yeah.
I remember hearing a speaker years ago say, and to the time allocation question, because I think I mentioned on the show last week that not all hours are created equal, not all weeks are created equal. So it's not about the amount of time we give to things, but the quality of time and energy we give to things. So I may have to give more time in terms of numerical value on the work front one week, but I'm spending quality time with you. It's not, it doesn't measure up the same from that perspective. But I do remember a guy years ago saying, show me your calendar and show me your checkbook. So you can go back to how far back this goes, because who has a checkbook anymore? But show me in other words, show me your calendar, what you give your time and energy to, what you pencil in, and what you spend your money on. And I'll tell you what your priorities are, right? So I think it is a good question in terms of just checking in to say, hey, if this really matters to me, am I carving out the time for it?
Yeah. I know for me, especially over the last several years, I'm still learning to be flexible and give myself the opportunity to reassess my priorities or where my time and energy is going.
Yeah.
So nurturing a deep relationship with Rob Yeah.
Jesus. I paid her $20 to say that because I knew how bad you would feel if she didn't. Thanks, Wendy. Good
I
job.
asked for 50. But
she takes it back.
Less quality time.
Less quality time, Rob.
$20 quality time.
$30 less, at least.
But nurturing that relationship, we just got married and we've talked about couple stuff on here before. It's very easy to fall into the pattern of doing all of the other shit and all of the other things without being intentional about time for ourselves or time. So really focusing on nurturing that deep relationship, as well as with our kids. We have 5 kids between all of us. And so really making sure that we're showing up at their stage in life and making that a priority, but also taking exceptional care of myself, which I haven't always done in the past. So my physical and my mental health and doing a better job at saying no, setting boundaries. For me, my priority might not be going to do that thing that I said yes to.
Right.
My priority might be, I'm going to sleep tonight because I need to rest.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think for me currently, if I look at this season of my life, I'd have to say relationships in the number one spot. So like you, you, my kids, my friends, like that is really important. My second one right now, it's interesting. I came through a period of, I would have said, even answered this maybe a year and a half ago very differently. I would have put personal growth as the next one. But I'm in a season right now of professional growth. So after a season of personal growth, there's all kinds of things opening up for me on the professional side. That's really cool. So that's another priority for me right now. And also growing the business. I mean, entrepreneur at heart, and there's some exciting things going on. And so that's a priority. And so again, I feel I'm in harmony with those priorities. But I think the cool part about this question is to say we might answer this question very differently 6 months from now.
Yeah, for sure.
This is where I think that, again, I come back to this hard, fast, rigid approach to work-life balance. It becomes irrelevant very, very quickly because it doesn't allow for life to really shift. And then we set up these very strong, the next place I want to go to is boundaries, but we set up these strong boundaries and those boundaries can become inflexible and not really allow for our lives evolving and changing and shifting. And now we feel out of sync, not with ourselves, but with these rigid boundaries that we set up. And now on top, now we're judging ourselves and feeling self-critical that we've dropped the ball on this boundary that actually may or may not actually be serving our current set of priorities. But let's talk about boundaries. What does that look like for you in terms of established boundaries that you may or may not have, and how effective are they in helping you maintain that work-life integration?
Yeah, I mean, I'm very good at shutting off work when I decide to shut off work. So if I close my laptop, I close my laptop. I don't have notifications on my phone. I'm not, if I think of like my 9 to 5 bold lib, I can shut that down and I'm good. With my, I would say, passion projects like Get To Mindset and even Living Richly, that for me is a harder one because I love it. Right. And I love Bold Lib too, but that takes up like 4 days of my week. Yeah. So when I get time to get into my passions, that for me can suck me in. And that's when I have a harder time, I think, with the boundary. And then that's where I go to, the musts, the coulds, the shouldn'ts, like you shouldn't be working right now. Like that language creeps in really, really quickly. Right. So I think my boundary in some areas is strong and in others, not as strong and a work in progress.
Yeah. Well, I think that's true. Yeah. But isn't it interesting, again, like when where in some areas we find it easy, other areas we find hard. Yeah. But the traditional approach to work-life balance would say, well, it's off work hours and you're working on this passion project, you're out of balance. Right. And yet if you're doing something you love, something that, and as long as, of course, you're not neglecting your kids, you're not neglecting but we've got an outdated I think, sense of what that means. And this is why work-life integration, working on a passion project during off hours when that's the only time you can do it, and yet you can still have boundaries around that and whatever the case may be. But it's just interesting how we go to judgment pretty fast.
Pretty quickly.
On that stuff.
Yeah. Well, when I think about passion, like my dad is in his mid-70s and he just retired from teaching because that was a part-time, obviously, but that was a passion for him. Speaking and coaching and whatnot. And I remember having a conversation with him once where he was like, but this is what I love to do. It's whether you call it a hobby or a passion, it doesn't feel like work.
Yeah.
Except when he had all of the exams to mark, but regardless, but that's why he continued doing it for as long as he did. I know for me, I tend to evaluate what I need and when I need it, because that can be different.
Right.
I don't work a typical 8 to 5.
Right.
I run a fitness studio. And so, it's open from 5 a.m. until 8:30 at night. And so while I have my core set of hours, it is still a live business where things happen and nuances. And I'm learning to create better boundaries around that and adjust my schedule when I need to. But, I try to be very intentional, or I'm learning to get better about being intentional at what's important to me. So same thing, do not disturb notifications. I don't wear my watch on Sundays. Those types of things where I will be purposefully intentful on what I'm doing, leaving my phone up in the bedroom. And if I'm downstairs and we're watching TV, so I'm not getting distracted, is what I try to do.
Yeah.
All good.
Yeah, for me, it's the boundary is really a question, and that is what or who needs my attention right now. And so sometimes that means 8 o'clock tonight, I will be doing passion project, but I'll be editing reels for Living Richly. Because they need to be done. And tonight is when that's what needs my attention. Another time, it could be something completely different. It could be, I need my attention. I need to just some self-care. Wendy might need my attention. Me. Mom.
No, even better, Finding Nemo. Mine.
But that voice is there, right?
Little sidebar, but whoever came up with that on Finding Nemo, that seagull, they're actually saying mine.
It's all you can hear now.
Oh my God. Every time I hear them, that's all I can do.
Exactly.
Sorry, you were saying something somewhat important.
Incredibly, brilliantly important. But it is around, and it takes away the notion of, it's 6 o'clock, 6 p.m. If I'm focused on work, I'm now out of balance.
Right.
No, what needs my attention right now? Now, if something is always the one thing that needs your attention, that's a different conversation. Now you need to evaluate why. That is the case. But that's the question that helps me set the boundaries.
Yeah, and let's approach it from this lens. Like again, with an integrated approach to work, and we explored this last week, where again, to your point, you don't have a traditional 9 to 5. A lot of folks now, especially with remote hybrid work, they might take the afternoon to go to their kids' school recital, and then work between 7 and 9 that night. And that's the beauty of this. Again, there is great flexibility in that. There's also great flexibility in understanding what are your best working hours. Right. For me, often still is early morning. I do my best work. Right. So before most folks are even awake, I've usually done an hour or two of work and gets me ahead of my day. And then if I want to knock off early, I can. So this flexibility is great. So this next question's a bit weird, because it's almost like, how often do you find yourself, regardless of what your arrangement looks like, how often do you find yourself thinking about work during leisure hours when you're off work?
Look at us. All of us.
We can all say it at the same time.
Next
all the time.
Right? Yeah. Okay. So let's talk about that.
So I'm a dreamer and a fantasizer.
Yes, he is. That's
Wendy's not that kind of show.
You won't be doing reels tonight at 6 o'clock.
Or you'll be doing a different.
You have to get up early tomorrow and work on that. But
I think about work all the time, but I don't see it as work. And this is kind of where I brought the example of my dad, because, I have that entrepreneurial spirit and bone in my body where I'm always thinking about, how can I impact more? How can I serve more? What can I do more? And it's just those creative juices, because I see it as service and I see it as value. And that's just something that I'm so passionate about. But going back to what I said, I've had to be very intentional and also proactive with time and energy and learning how to protect my boundaries, and also getting better, thanks to my therapist, Sherry.
Thanks, Sherry.
Thanks, Sherry. Learning to talk about what's festering in my mind versus completely shutting out. So that might mean talking to Rob about, here's what's going on in my mind. Just help me kind of talk me off the ledge, or help me kind of feel a little more balanced. And usually that helps, but I'm learning to get better at that instead of trying to do it all on my own.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think for me, it's again, all the time we'll go for walks, and I might be talking to Wendy about, work, or, dealing with stuff at Rhapsody, or we're going to be talking about living richly, or talking about the real life. We're always having conversations around that. The checkpoint for me is, can I, again, showing up authentically. So when I am, if we're just together and we're spending time together, am I truly focused in on being present with Wendy in that moment? Or am I thinking about work and distracted from being present in that moment?
Right.
Yeah. I think I kind of have a bit of both of what you said. It's, when you're thinking about something that you're passionate about, then that's dreaming and ideating. And for me, that's a positive. That's something that's fun. I love that. It's when the to-do list run through my head nonstop that that's where I get stuck, and I have frantic dreams about my to-do list that I'm not getting to.
Right.
I'm working on that one.
Yeah.
But for me, that's it's like that. If I can't get it out of my brain and onto paper, like, how many times do I have to write a list? I just got to write it all down. I got to get it out for me. I think that's what keeps me, I would say that's the stressor, the anxiety point that maybe keeps me, that I would like to continue to work on.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and you and I mean, both again have that creative. It shows up differently for both of us, but are both very creative. We're entrepreneurs. We have amazing business conversations. But there's also many times where we say, hey, we're not talking about work tonight.
Yeah.
We're going to talk, even though we're passionate, we're going to focus in on us. We're going to focus in on other stuff, because we can get carried away with it. But I know the creativity, and I think there's lots of, business people, entrepreneurs, creative people who could relate to this. Creativity does not respect the 9 to 5 framework.
Right.
Creativity happens when it happens. And so I go through, I go through creative seasons where it's there and it's flowing, and I'm just going to respect it. And I'm much better with managing that than I used to be.
Yeah.
But again, one of my clients, he says, it's about asking if things are the right size right now. Is this the right size? Is this too big?
I love that.
Is this too small? And if something's too small, then I need to look at how can I upsize that? Right? Is this too big, or how do I downsize that a little bit right now? But asking yourself the question regularly helps you kind of regulate.
Yeah.
But let's face it, for those of us that are business owners and leaders and lead organizations, have organizations, I often use this language. We've used it at Rhapsody. I use it with clients all the time, that business is a vehicle to help you get what you want out of life, right? Some of us are very fortunate. We love the drive. We've got a great vehicle and we actually enjoy driving it, right? Well, if that's the case, then it's again, making space, making room for that, while making sure that the other aspects of your life are not being neglected. Again, integration, not balance, right?
Yeah.
Let's look at another question. What are some of the activities that you engage in to fill your tank back up after you've had a particular difficult week or challenging week? And how often do you kind of prioritize? How do those activities show up in your day-to-day?
Yeah. Charcuterie boards.
Cheese board, and that's like daily.
Yeah, I was having a week. Was it last week or the week before? And you came home with a cheese platter and a bottle of wine, and like, we laugh about it, but that's what I needed right at that time. I think you had maybe one bite. I ate the rest of it, but regardless, that doesn't matter.
No judgment.
But yeah, so reading, talking. We have before bed chats where the lights are, dimmed and we're about to go to sleep, but we share about, what our favorite parts of the day. I guarantee tonight we'll be like, what was your favorite episode? Yeah. And just having that connection piece. Fitness for me is massive. Yeah. Music is massive. Nature. And also things like cleaning out social media.
Right.
I get a lot of gratification out of cleaning my
Yeah, I noticed that
Stuff.
we're not friends on Facebook anymore. I was going to ask you about that.
I blocked you.
I'm hurt. I'm a little hurt.
No, but just allowing that new energy to come in. If I find that there's other things that just aren't, if I find I'm falling into like that comparison game, or I just feel like, that feeling when you're looking at stuff and you're like, fuck's sakes, I'm like, okay, that's a sign that I don't need to follow you anymore. And, just kind of allowing that new energy to come in.
Yeah, absolutely. Love that.
I love the question. And I think that we all have those activities, obviously very much similar activities.
Yeah, I think
getting
we're all
on the
very similar
water.
on that
Yeah,
front,
we really do. And certainly when I'm thinking of this is where I'll go back to shameless plug. The 15-day Life Vision Challenge is so critical for this very thing, because what that gives you is it gives you a sense of what are the things that energize you and what are the things that steal your energy.
Yeah.
And if you can go through the process of figuring that stuff out, you'll create rituals rather than saying, and we see this all the time, somebody give me some ideas on things I can do to energize myself. Well, or you can figure out for yourself by using a tool like the 15-day challenge to be able to understand truly who you are and how do you energize yourself.
Yeah, and we even talked last week about avoid the whole notion of I have to find a hobby.
Right.
Because that language is so problematic. It's like you're making a commitment to something before you even know if you love it. If you're unsure about what you enjoy, well, go back to your past. Think about things you've done before, maybe when you were younger that you really enjoyed. There's some hints there. There's just trying different things without committing to them. Like try it. Give it a fair shake, like 2 or 3 times perhaps, because everything you do that's new may feel a little uncomfortable at first, but it's just about finding that rhythm where I am filling my tank regularly with something outside of work. Because I do know that I live most of my life very strong on the purpose side. I think you and I could relate to that. Purpose was always big for us. Now it was loaded and filled with all this religious stuff that was unhealthy. But purpose was my number one thing. But I wasn't filling my cup with things that outside of that. And so 3 burnouts later, I started to kind of wise up and say, this isn't working. I need to make sure that I'm building my life, not just following my purpose.
Yeah. And I think filling your cup in different places is so important. Like, it's easy to get into a rut of filling your cup in the same spot all the time. And I think it's so good to try new things. Like we're heading off. Well, when this airs, it'll be done, but we're going off to Blues Fest tonight. And I every year it comes and we're so excited. And then where it's like, oh, we got to get there. And it's like, but it's like you get there and then you're alive for a week and it's amazing. And so that's different. And then going to the cottage or seeing friends or mixing it up, I think sometimes, and just filling your cup and filling your cup with different people too is so amazing.
Because changing your environment, changing the scenery, changing because it'd be so easy after like a full day of recording to just say, we're just going to stay home and do what we've done a lot, which is maybe put on a movie and whatever, and that would be fine. But changing your environment and doing something new can be so invigorating. Yeah, right. And what about have you guys experienced some recent situations where work kind of was encroaching too much in on the rest of your life and was creating some negative, perhaps fallout, either in your relationships or in your life in general?
When you ask it that way, I don't know if work encroaches on it. I choose to. If I'm dealing with some performance metrics that I'm not hitting that I want to hit, and so I put on myself this level of stress and anxiety that then begins to flow into. I feel it in my shoulders, everything. Your body just handles that stress the way all of us do, right? We're not in healthy ways. Yes, you can lose sleep. You can kind of you fall into those old scripts, and so I think when I'm not, the way work encroaches into my personal life is when I'm not achieving or doing what I think I should be doing, then all of a sudden it impacts everything.
Right. The mindset goes, the mindset for sure.
Right.
Yeah. I know for me, my frustration creeps in a lot when the people that I work with, don't have the same level of care, commitment or passion that I do.
Right.
And I've really had to learn to be okay with not everything is going to be 150%. Right. I've scaled back the perfectionism piece, but I still struggle with the passion piece and the care piece. Like, why can't people just like care as much as I do? And then I get frustrated because I'm like, because you care too fucking much, right?
Right.
And so, but then I get overwhelmed. And when I get overwhelmed, I cry. I also shut down and I don't talk and I become like sullen and quiet. And so I'm learning to get better at this, but I'm also learning to scale back on the things that maybe they don't need to be done.
Right.
Like,
Right.
you know, it's nice if it was done, but nobody's going to give a shit if it's done or not.
Yeah.
And that's okay.
Yeah.
And maybe I'm going to put my energy somewhere else.
I love that.
Yeah.
I tell my leaders all the time, I said, there's two things that only you, and I'm saying this, I say it of myself, I say it to them, it's something only you can manage. And that's your energy, where it goes, and your expectations, right? And oftentimes your energy is going to misplaced expectations, right? Where we set the bar just so high that we so want to do a good job, or we so want to help others, and actually that extra 20% that we're going makes, if we didn't do it, the vast majority of people wouldn't even notice. So you ask yourself what you're doing it for and what's the price of that. Right?
Yeah. I think for me, it's like, I think it was last week. Last week of school is always a zoo. And I'm like, work has just been extremely busy for us. And we've had some partners in and out. And so the workload has been a lot heavier. And then when workload is heavier and personal life is heavier, that's for me when I have a really difficult time. And that's where I feel like I'm getting pulled in 1,000 different directions. And I feel like I'm not doing anything well. And when I get to that space is when I'm like, I'm done. Like my cup is full. Like Eric was over and we were in the kitchen and I just whipped around and I looked at him and I just bawled. And I'm not someone who typically does that. I'm doing it more and more because I'm learning to let it just be like, he's like, what's wrong? I'm like, I'm super overwhelmed. Like I'm completely overwhelmed and it just flows all the way through and out. And it's almost like, oh, yeah, okay, I'm overwhelmed. Interesting. Instead of like just keeping it all in.
I love that you're letting that flow.
Yeah.
It's so much help.
Well, it's that notion of, again, that we come back to that.
Emotion.
It's emotion. The word motion's in there. And when we feel like we need to somehow, I don't know, we feel this need to be strong or be tough. Yeah. And what we do is all that negative energy actually gets trapped inside of us and actually makes things far worse. For me, over the last year and a half, I would say the business has gotten really big. I talk about the size, it's gotten a lot bigger, and that's both by choice and some of it not by choice, but it's both very exhilarating but has been very very demanding, and so I'm still trying to right size that. So Kate and I don't live together, but we've been integrating our lives a lot more, which is amazing and absolutely love it, but it means now trying to manage two households with a very like the back and forth. So learning to kind of what does my routine now look like, because it's a bit different with the back and forth. And so I'm aware that work's too big right now, and my self-care is too small, and I'm in the process of adjusting that, right, and finding a better flow. We talked a lot about flexible work schedules and how the workplace has really evolved, and how there's a real battle lines being drawn in the workplace right now between the fight for how it used to be to the fight to where it's where it's going. But how flexible is your sort of work environment, work schedule, and does that flexibility kind of serve you well right now?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I feel very fortunate, but I take ownership of carving out a 4-day work week, which is what I committed to when I started before Bold Lip moved that way.
Yeah, that was you negotiated.
I negotiated that so that I could have 1 day a week where I could focus on Get To mindset and growing that. And they fully are backing that and super supportive of that.
Yeah, they even hosted a webinar where they right through for Get To mindset. It was incredible support that they've
shown which I'm not used to. I'm so used to a corporate who's like, no, you can't have this on my side, right? So it's one. So I feel very grateful. We have we're all very respectful of each other. You have an appointment, you go. We all will cover for each other if someone has something, family emergency, whatever that looks like. Today, I just feel very grateful. I haven't ever had this.
Right.
And to have it now, it feels like such a gift because I see the impact that it has on my kids. I see the impact it has on my overall stress level and how I show up for my family, how I show up for my friends, how I show up with you. It's just, it diminishes my stress level to not feel like I'm trapped in this box.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah.
And I love that you asked for it.
Yeah.
Which I think a lot of people are afraid of. I think that's a great message for people that, you know, if you don't ask, they're not just going to give it to you. I mean, maybe some places will, but the fact that you had the courage to ask, I think it's amazing.
I think it's like one of the greatest bargaining chips now. Like,
Absolutely.
and some of my leaders, I hope they're not listening to this part, but it's a new competitive advantage. One of the most competitive advantages for hiring and creating a great culture is creating a flexible hybrid type workspace where work from home is a lot easier to do. It opens up your hiring pool from your local environment to you can literally hire from anywhere. I mean, there's all kinds of business benefits to it. There's challenges to doing it as well. But I think companies that offer it versus companies that don't, the ones that don't are going to find themselves increasingly out of pace and hard to compete because I think in many cases, people will take a lower paying job with flexibility than a higher paying job with less flexibility.
Totally agree.
Yeah. I know for me, for my work schedule, it depends on what I'm doing. I run a very busy studio, and member experience is just as important, if not more important, than the actual fitness experience. That's just who I am as a person. I want everyone to feel seen, heard, and impacted personally. It's such a high expectation that I have. Part of that, I guess you could say that's part of a double-edged sword, because that's kind of where that care and compassion piece comment comes in, where I just want people to feel the same as I do on delivering such a phenomenal experience. So sometimes I have control over that schedule. Sometimes I don't. If there's an issue and it's happened before and I've got to go in, and I'm so grateful that Rob understands how much I love my work and is able to support me with that as well. But when I'm building out the real life, I have control over that schedule. And so I'm able to build that out how I want. And I've gotten to the point where I'm not desperate to land a client. If that means sacrificing time that I don't want to give up or time with us, I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, which is so good. You and I are very similar just because of our backgrounds. You know, I'm almost ashamed to admit I've never had a 9-to-5 job. Right? Like I've always,
because no one would hire you.
They'd all hire me. They'd all hire me.
I'd hire you.
Yeah, you know.
But I'm just a gigolo. Life goes on without me.
Wow.
You hired me.
I did hire you.
There you go.
I know.
No, but so literally from the age of 19, I have had somewhat control over my schedule. And
you'd make a terrible employee.
And so I would make, we both would make terrible employees if I had to go into a job 9 to 5, Monday to Friday. So, I don't know what I would do. And so I'm very blessed, very fortunate to have, that's been my experience, to the point that today, I know sometimes when people first shift into a job where they have more flexibility, they don't know how to balance that.
Yeah.
Right. And I think I'm pretty good at balancing it because it's all I've known. Now, I will say is back when I was working for God, the balance wasn't there because you were on all the time, right? I mean, you were there Sundays, and most ministers would take Mondays off. Well, Monday you're exhausted from a busy Sunday, so you'd sleep all day. You'd be brain dead. You wouldn't want to have a conversation.
Yeah, but on Monday, your family was your kids were in
and your
school,
kids are in school,
was
like
at work.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So you weren't seeing them anyway.
Yeah,
and it was always, the church needs something. Sorry, but we got to sacrifice for God, right? So I think it was really unhealthy, having the ability to, I would never say no, because you just don't say no in that world. Whereas today, I'm very comfortable saying no. I've had, even if a client, where can you do this? It's going to be a Saturday. Yeah, no.
Yeah.
No, well, and 99% of the time, when a client pushes on a time and I give them I say, no, I can't do it. I'll do this time. They adjust.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Exactly.
But so I've learned that is I can say no and it's not going to sacrifice or cost me something.
Yeah. Let's talk about stress for a little bit. We talked about recharging, but dealing with stress is a little bit different. It's one thing to fill your cup up, right after, but it's what are the stress management techniques that you use? And initially the question said like stress from work, but I'm like, stress shows up not just at work, it shows up in life everywhere. And work. But what are your most effective like stress management techniques?
My newest technique, I've had other techniques, meditation or not meditation, but reflection, those kind of things. My newest technique that I've really only leaned into in the last, since I've met Wendy, and that is talking it out. One of the things, and I did this not that long ago, where I was sharing stress that I had, and I just openly just said, hey, I'm gonna just share with you what's going on in my head and everything like this. And I wasn't looking for answers. I wasn't looking for, and it was amazing to me just hearing myself talk it out to somebody who I am vulnerable with. Was all I needed. I felt the release go. And I'm like, oh, I got this.
Yeah.
I was okay with it after and I've been okay with it since I talked it out. So that's a new one for me, is having a person in my life that I feel comfortable with that kind of vulnerability.
But that's another way. I mean, you talked about recently that moment where you felt overwhelmed in the kitchen. I remember that. And but you just let it move through you. Another way of letting things move through you, like stress or whatever else, is to talk it out with someone who's not going to judge you, someone who's not going to try to fix it or give you all this advice. And I try to remind myself all the time, because as a guy, I'm a fixer. That most of the time, that's not what people need. No. They just need a listening ear and a place to kind of let that energy flow through them and hear you
and let it go through.
Just to go with that point, there's a funny story with a client that I was with this week, and his wife has the real issues with her job and everything like this, and so she's sharing this with him, and he's telling me this because he's sharing, and he's sharing some real personal things. So he's sharing this story, and he's telling how he's trying to fix it, work it through, and everything like this. And I said to him, I said, "Here, can I suggest something to you? When you go home tonight, rather than tell your wife what she should do." I said, here's what I'm going to encourage you. I said, go home and just say to her, hey, honey, I know that you are more than capable of handling this. How do I best serve you?
Yeah. What do you need?
And he writes,
how can I help?
He writes that down. And as we're wrapping up the call, I always say, hey, was today's call helpful? Was this value? And he goes, Rob, he said, I think you saved me about 3 weeks of grief.
I might get to sleep in the bedroom tonight. Instead of on the couch.
But it's to your point. We're fixers. And sometimes we just need to be listeners.
Yeah.
One of the game changers for me in terms of dealing with stress has been it's not what I think about work. It's what I think about work. Like it's how I perceive it and how I, and I think the biggest game changer, I've just come through a season, very busy at work, like lots of client work, lots of conferences, lots of all day stuff, and just a very, very heavy client load in terms of also launching the 15-day life challenge and everything else. There's just been a lot, right? And there's been weeks where I'm looking ahead at my schedule and I'm like, oh. And I remember I used to catastrophize that. I'm like, oh, it's going to be so hard. And now when I remind myself, I said, hey, Eric, it's okay. Like, you've had weeks like this before. You've had weeks that have more in your calendar than this before. And you not only survived them, you thrived right through them, and you did just fine. This is just another one of those. Yeah. So I think what we tell ourselves about what we're going through, if we go right back to Albert Ellis, and we're going to be dedicating an entire episode to some of the mindset stuff that we teach all of our clients that's been so meaningful for us, is it's not the events of life that actually cause most of our misery or cause our suffering. It's not what shows up on our doorstep that causes that. It's what we believe about that. Yeah. It's what we make that mean.
Absolutely.
That determines the level of suffering. It can be hard, but we end up suffering because we choose to perceive it in a way that's much worse than it really is.
100%.
Right? I am so grateful for, and you were the one that introduced me to this phrase. I don't know if it's original with you but
of course it is.
Changing.
I'm gonna take credit for it.
Changing the language of "it is what it is" to "it is what you make it to be." Right? Yeah. And I say
not
that,
original to me.
No. Okay, but I say that I will say that to clients. I say that to my kids. I say it to myself all the time. Is that phrase, and I've just so embraced that one because there's so much power to it.
There's a measure of it. I've had clients push back on me on that one. They say, but there's a measure of it is what it is, where you're just accepting that this is what is happening as opposed to resisting it. So that part of it.
But that's what you're making it.
Right. It also can lead to victim, a kind of a victim position of it is what it is. I'm almost powerless to do anything about it.
Exactly.
We are rarely as powerless or as stuck as we think 100%. We are. Most of the time, there is something we can do, shift, decide that can change that whole risk.
Yeah. And I think for me, exactly what you said is to minimize my stress. I just look at my stress differently now, where I'm like, is this really worthwhile getting so worked up about?
Right. Yeah.
Like I'm amped. Okay. Do I need to be this amped? Can I bring that amp down?
Yeah.
And the beauty of that is like, I get to decide how I react to that stress. Yeah. It's not happening to me. I'm creating the stress myself. Yeah. No one is putting stress on me. Yeah. That's inward. And when you can get to that place and really look at it and start to I just always picture this meter. I'm here like an old school thermometer, like at the top, and I'm red and I can just want to bring it down.
Right. Yep.
And I get to do that. You can choose to do that. I'm not saying it's easy, but you can.
Yeah. 100%. I'm going to skip ahead to the last question just for the sake of time here. I think it's been, again, a great conversation. I'd rather us not race through. I want us to spend a bit of time here because I think this is a really powerful question. But when each of you kind of is looking forward, what are some changes that you might be able to make to improve or increase your work-life integration? Like when you're thinking of some shifts, some changes, some decisions, what are you currently working on?
Yeah, I think kind of to piggyback on what I said, good can sometimes be just as okay as great. Right. And that allows me to open up more space for other things that I want to do or that where I want to direct my attention to go. For me, continuous work on boundaries and being able to embrace my personal bill of rights. I still remember when you introduced that book to me. I've introduced it to many of my clients, The Art of Everyday Assertiveness. We can put that in the show notes. But it's been a great tool for allowing myself to give myself permission that I don't need to justify anything around what it is that I choose to do. So that's a continued work in progress.
I love
for
that.
me.
Not everything deserves or even requires our best energy.
Yeah.
Right. But I think we did a show, months ago now, last year, I think it was, on being a high performer or over performer. And I think we all admitted that we're kind of recovering over performers. And when you fall into that category, we tend to give, like, everything needs this massive output of energy, and sometimes that's just not required, right? We don't need to deplete ourselves so readily on every little thing that comes our way. Love that.
And I think for me, the thing I would say is for a lot of people, again, that don't have the luxury that we have in creating our own. There is a boss. There is a right. The person who is giving the paycheck is stating things. Focus in on the things that are within your control. You may not have any. You may not have the choice or the option to work a 4-day work week. You may have to go into work X number of days. But again, you have still, even in those moments, you have so much that's still within your control.
Yeah, I love that.
And to focus in on the things that are within your control rather than the things outside.
Right. And again, one of the things that's within your control is if you're in the wrong environment, right? You can either learn to bloom in the field you're currently planted in, or you can get a transplant. You can, you can move to another field, but you always have a choice, right? You're not powerless. Yeah. But what are some things that you're currently either working on or thinking of working on when you think of improving your work-life integration?
Well, I think at the top of the list would be just managing expectations, right? And it's making sure, again, go back to what I said around my definition of success in the last week's episode, is that's that notion of showing up authentically, of being authentic in every situation. And so even in work-life balance, the biggest thing I'm working on is, who am I trying to please? And if I know I am showing up the right way, then that's enough. Right. And I don't need to push that further. And so managing those expectations around why those demands or what those demands are on me and how do I work through those.
Yeah, love that.
I think for me, it's the forgiveness part. So when it all, like even that moment in the kitchen when I'm crying, that is me giving myself permission to not beat up on myself, but be more compassionate with myself. So when it all starts, well, I feel like it's all falling apart, and maybe to no one else's vision, but inside I feel like it's all falling apart. Just to be a little bit easier on myself.
Yeah. Be more forgiving. More
Yeah.
gracious. I'm still working through this model that I created. I think
It's a good model.
where you kind of look at what are my current obligations. So obligations are like work and family and relationships, things that I have obligated myself to. These are healthy obligations. What are all my obligations currently? What are my aspirations? Those are goals, things I want to do, things that I'd love to do, right? What are my expectations? So that the expectations piece falls in there. And what expectations do I need to manage better? And then what are my inspirations? What are the things that inspire me, light my heart on fire? The things that I do that light my heart on fire? And kind of using that as a model to evaluate kind of my work-life integration. How am I doing? And am I in harmony or out of harmony? And every time I do it, what I'm realizing more and more is how I put just about everything in the obligation category and treat it, right? So talk about giving everything my best energy. I'm like, actually, I never made a commitment to do this. This is something I want to do.
Yeah.
So why am I holding myself to this unrealistic expectation of getting it done in the next week when actually there's other things I've actually said I need to get done, right? So,
or that I want to get done.
That I want to get done. Exactly.
For sure.
Okay, a final round of questions here, lightning round. What's one piece of advice you'd offer someone struggling to move away from sort of that traditional model? We've explored lots about this flexibility around it, and I do want to make sure people didn't misunderstand what we're talking about: flexibility about boundaries and not being too rigid. If someone has come out of a period of being really out of harmony and they've had to establish strong boundaries to get themselves back on track, stick with it, right? Like until you know that you're back on a solid footing. Just be mindful that those boundaries are serving you well right now. They might not serve you the same way a year from now. So just be flexible in your approach to that. But what's one piece of advice you'd give to our listeners on how to approach this work-life integration thing in a healthier way?
Hi.
Wow.
And it's a wrap.
No, I think balance isn't something that you find. It's something that you create. It's like motivation. People in the gym world or the fitness space will always say, I just can't find motivation. Motivation isn't something that you find or something you're born with. It's something that you cultivate through consistency. So whether that's consistency on saying no to things that don't serve you, whatever the case may be. Somebody said something to me once and it always stuck with me. And that's, don't be so busy making a living that you forget to make a life.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah, that's a great one.
That's great.
Yeah, I would suggest get present, write down some things that you want to shift. So what's not working great for you right now if you feel out of balance, and write down what would feel better.
Right.
And then it kind of gives you something to maybe start with, and then pick one.
Yeah.
And see if you can focus on one thing. And it doesn't have to be these, we talk about this all the time. Micro changes add up over time. It doesn't have to be a career shift. It can be a very small change that you implement in your day to day. But write it down. Start.
Yeah.
I would say learning to accept more chaos. Right. There's another old saying that says, what you resist persists. And when we fight some of these changes that are normal evolutions and ebbs and flows in our lives, I think what we end up setting up for ourselves is an internal struggle, right? I said it much earlier, I think it was on last week's show, that when you're out of harmony internally, nothing you do can help you find harmony externally. So start by embracing some more chaos, be more flexible, avoid that chaos and rigidity. And be more accepting of how life comes and flows.
I would encourage people to pause, rewind about 20 seconds there and listen to that statement again, because I think there's so much truth to that, right? It's about the internal, and that fits into, I think, similar to what I really want to leave people with, and that is, you're not defined by what you do. You're not defined by those externals. You're not defined by your role at work. You're not defined as your role as a parent. You know, that's not you. Those are the roles you play and the things you do. And when you get really clear on who you are, what matters to you and what enriches you, the work-life balance question
it
Goes
changes.
away.
Yeah, it changes dramatically.
I love
Absolutely.
that.
Guys, this has been another great conversation. I'm always, this is one of my rituals I look forward to every month, even though it's a whole day of recording, having these rich conversations, exploring these topics with guys. And I walk away with so much to think about.
Yeah.
And folks, thanks for tuning in. I hope that you feel like I do, kind of like I got so much to unpack now. I hope you really got lots out of these two conversations around rejecting the traditional work-life bullshit and finding sanity beyond the scales. We encourage you to please like, share, and subscribe to the show. Let's get the message of the Living Richly Nation out there. The audience continues to grow. Our listenership and viewership continues to grow. And we're so excited that you're along for the ride with us. We encourage you to go to our website, livingrichly.me, where you can find great information about all kinds of things, but two things in particular. One is the Living Richly Nation Facebook group. That's our private, exclusive Facebook group where we have hundreds and hundreds of members who are on a similar journey of trying to live their best life, and you can find a growing community there of people on a similar journey and similar path. And you can also learn about the 15-day Life Vision Challenge. We referred to it today. Not only can you figure out who you are and what you stand for, but what are the things that fill your cup and bring you more happiness, and how can you turn the volume up on that? It's a completely free online experience, a tool designed to help you just live your best life. We are so grateful you've tuned in. We hope we'll see you again next week. Until then, get out there and live your best life.